All right, today we're jumping into a topic that affects millions of us, anxiety. But here's the thing, it doesn't look or feel the same for everyone. We're going to explore what anxiety is like, specifically within the Black community, pulling our insights directly from the source material.
So we all know anxiety is one of the most common mental health challenges out there. But that begs a really important question. Is that experience universal? Is it the same for every single person? Well, as the data shows, the answer is a lot more complicated than you might think.
Okay, let's get right into it. The feeling of anxiety, that pit in your stomach, the racing thoughts, that might be a shared human experience. But the reality of why it's happening and the world you're dealing with it in, that can be a completely different story.
So check this out. This slide really lays it bare. On the left, you've got the general triggers for anxiety that can affect anyone. Things like trauma, family history, you name it. But for Black Americans, the sources showed there's this whole other layer of risk factors. And it's not instead of the first list, it's on top of it. We're talking about the direct impact of racism, police violence, and systematic issues like fewer opportunities.
And that right there, that leads us to a really critical idea if we're going to understand this difference. We have to talk about the sheer weight of racism and the impact of something experts call racial trauma.
So what exactly is racial trauma? Well, the source defines it as the mental and emotional injury that comes from dealing with racial bias and discrimination. And I think that word injury is so important. It's not just feeling bad. It's a real and lasting wound with deep psychological effects.
And when that injury happens over and over again, day after day, it has a cumulative effect. Researchers actually have a name for this: weathering. Think about it like a constant steady drip of water on a rock. Over time, that chronic stress from racism literally erodes a person's mental and physical health.
And this isn't just a psychological concept. It has devastating real-world consequences. This weathering effect is pointed to as one of the key reasons why, on average, Black people in the U.S. live shorter lives than white people. That stress literally wears down the body over a lifetime.
Okay, so let's shift gears and look at the hard numbers. Because this disparity we're talking about, it isn't just a theory. It shows up clear as day in the data.
Just look at this number, 20%. According to the source, Black Americans experience serious mental health issues at a rate that's a full 20% higher than the general population. That is a massive difference.
And it goes deeper than just general anxiety. The data shows that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is way more common in the Black community. And since PTSD, by its very definition, comes from experiencing trauma, this statistic is a direct mirror of those higher rates of trauma we were just talking about.
This next chart is, honestly, it's really tough to look at, especially because it's about our kids. It shows the suicide attempt rates among high schoolers. For Black students, it's 9.8%. For white students, it's 6.1%. That gap is it's stark, and it's incredibly concerning.
And what's even more alarming is the direction things are headed. This isn't a static problem. Between 1991 and 2017, the suicide attempt rate for white teens actually went down. But for Black teens, it went up. The trend lines are literally going in opposite directions, which signals a crisis that's getting worse, not better.
So you see all this data, and you have to ask, right? With such a clear and growing need, why is it so incredibly hard to get help? Let's talk about the barriers, the invisible walls that stand in the way of wellness.
A huge piece of the puzzle is cultural stigma. This quote from the source material really hits home. In many families, if they have a mental health condition or seek mental health care, it may feel like a sign of weakness. That pressure to always be strong, to be resilient, can make it almost impossible to admit you need help.
And it's not just what's happening inside families. There are these massive systemic walls people run into. There's a real fear of being labeled crazy or dangerous by a system that already has biases. There's a major shortage of therapists who actually get the role race plays in mental health. And then there are the practical things, like just trying to find someone your insurance will cover and being able to afford it.
And that point about cost, it's not abstract. Here's a number that makes it crystal clear. Back in 2018, 11.5% of Black people in the U.S. didn't have health insurance. For millions of people, that right there makes consistent professional therapy completely unaffordable.
Okay, so after all those heavy statistics and barriers, I want to be clear, this is not a hopeless situation. Far from it. There are pathways to healing. So let's talk about what culturally informed support and coping can look like.
First, let's talk about the clinical approaches that have been proven to work. You've got therapy, which is so key for figuring out your triggers and building coping skills. For some people, medication can be a really helpful tool. And in very severe cases, residential treatment provides that intensive, around-the-clock support.
But treatment isn't just what happens in a doctor's office. The sources also point to these other powerful strategies. Things like basic self-care, sleep, exercise, diet, which are foundational. Finding a voice through activism, building that strong support system around you, and exploring practices like meditation and yoga.
But out of all these strategies, this might be the most crucial point of all. For any of this to really work, you need a therapist who gets it, someone who understands the role that race and racial trauma play in a person's life and their anxiety. That's not just a nice to have, it's absolutely essential for real healing to begin.
So, when you put it all together, healing is obviously a deeply personal journey, but it doesn't happen in a bubble. And that leaves us with a really big question, not just for individuals, but for all of us. How can our systems, our communities, our society do better at supporting that journey?